There are moments when history refuses to stay buried, when a thin folder of paper outlives the steel that once kept it secret. The story you're about to hear began not with a siren or a sonar ping, but with a banker's box in a dusty archive. Inside were photocopies of crew rosters, reactor logs, typed memos with crooked staples, and a handful of handwritten notes in a tight, slanted script. Someone, somewhere, had kept these pages through transfer orders, political purges, and the kind of institutional forgetfulness that swallows inconvenient truths. The label on the spine was bland, Fleet Technical, MISC, but the first page inside carried a sentence that tingled the skin. Under no circumstances are these procedures to be discussed outside the assigned command. At first glance, the bundle looked random. A watch bill from a Soviet ballistic missile submarine in 1986, a heat-stress table for a diesel-electric boat that crossed the Atlantic in 1962, a memo about signaling depth charges, a phone log from a coastal radio station that picked up a stranger's voice speaking American English, in a tone so steady it sounded rehearsed. And then there was the accident report, the one that smelled faintly of damp cardboard and old glue. Its title was brutal in its simplicity: Missile Tube Incident, Compartment 4, Material Failure Under Mixed Agent Conditions. These were not the dramatic photographs we associate with the Cold War. No heroic portraits, no flags at half-mast, just procedural prose that never intended to be cinematic. But the language bled at the edges. Seawater is referred to as a contaminant. A young machinist's mate is reduced to hands available for manual actuation. A captain's human hesitation is flattened into delay interval 0036. If you hold the papers long enough, an outline appears: 2 submarines 2 days separated by a quarter century, and a single horrifying secret revealed in the fine print: how close we came to the edge, and how the rules written on land drove men under the sea to the brink. Viewer discretion is advised. What follows includes descriptions of lethal accidents, suffocation, and the inescapable math of nuclear weapons. There is no gore here, but there is a kind of cruelty that bureaucracy often hides. Lives measured in minutes of breathable air, decisions constrained by paragraphs of doctrine and courage, recorded as a modification to a checklist in a binder no one was supposed to read. We start in the North Atlantic, 1986. The binder calls it a propellant seawater interaction event. Sailors called it something else. They called it a nightmare. The logbook entries for the Project 667A boat are dry. Latitude, longitude, depth, battery status, reactor coolant delta, routine drills. On October 3rd, the handwriting shifts. A tighter script, the pen pressing harder into the paper. At 0514, a note that should never appear in a missile compartment. Leak observed at plug interface tube 6. Portside. A margin scribble adds an instruction. Ascend to 46 sim. Engage pumps. That's the moment every article skims, but the documents slow down. They start using numbers, reaction products, flow rates. The minutes begin to matter. Water, just a few stubborn drops at first, found its way into a system built for rocket fuel. The mixture did not explode immediately. It argued first. The pages describe gas production under heat, bronze valves sweating, a brown cloud gathering behind a plug that was designed to defy panic. Nitrogen dioxide, chlorine, words that smell even on paper. The compartment chief calls for an accident alert at 5:32. He orders the compartment sealed. 8 seconds later, the silo loses integrity. The missile ejects, a full warhead punching into pressure and darkness. 2 men are crushed by water they can't even see coming. The rest of the boat becomes a blind animal, thrashing for equilibrium. Loudspeakers die. Compartment doors slam. A crowd of 25 sailors are boxed into a pocket of steel with the air thinning, and no one in charge of the pocket except the oldest man, who remembers to count. He taps the wall in sets of 5 to keep them from hyperventilating. Elsewhere, a captain who knows the map of this submarine as well as his own hands argues with his orders. He is supposed to preserve command presence. He is supposed to hold position until told. He is supposed to save the ship. Above all, he is supposed to prevent a reactor incident. The automatic shutdown never arrives. A line was cut in the blast, a tiny thing, a single path for a single signal, and in the belly of the boat the temperature begins to rise in degrees that belong in kitchens and boiler rooms, not in a reactor compartment a few meters from where men are breathing through damp rags. 2 names appear. They are small in the file, unadorned black ink, a reactor control officer who goes first and does not come out, and a 20-year-old who pushes the door open to hell because someone has to. He is given no speech in these papers. The description of his deed is a phrase, "Manual insertion complete, automatic trip confirmed." No angels, no trumpets, no swelling strings. Just the dull relief of physics obeying at last. Heat slumps down the scale. The equation that could have turned a submarine into a traveling reactor fire is cancelled by the click of a rod in its guide. He cannot get out. Pressure jams the hatch. The file offers a terrible sentence here, a sentence only paper can offer without breaking. Communication from inside ceased at time illegible. The boat lives because a young man has accepted a room that is about to become a furnace. The engineers rewrite a line in a manual later, clarifying that, in manual mode, actuation requires 2 personnel for torque. It's an honest sentence. It does not mention that it costs someone everything. Damage control is never quick and never clean. Pumps roar. The tow line from a merchant vessel bites the sea and snaps like a violin string. The captain, who will be blamed and then quietly unblamed, walks the length of the scorched deck and orders what he is not supposed to order: abandon ship. The log calls it transfer of personnel. Photocopies of a radio transcript show a voice offering assistance, and another voice, hoarse and formal, refusing nothing and promising nothing. When the boat finally slips under, it is not cinematic. It is administrative. Depth, coordinates, 2 reactors, several dozen warheads. Status, lost. The documents that survive this event are defensive. Each paragraph seems to argue with an accusation. Each technical appendix bends toward a single conclusion that is both true and dishonest. This was a material failure, aggravated by procedural error. The young man who saved a hemisphere is treated like a gasket that worked to specification. And yet, even in the greyest report, a human contour shows through. A final addendum notes, with regret, the death of a junior seaman in service of safety. The only part that reads like an epitaph is a pencil note in the margin, perhaps made by a clerk who did not expect anyone to read it. No monument will reach him. The 1962 packet is stranger. It is filled with things that look harmless. A laminated card explaining heat injuries, a folded instruction sheet on signaling charges with a cartoon drawing of a destroyer, the skim of a Captain S notebook with salt stains and a thumbprint where someone with grease under his nails turned the page. It is a paper world built to keep a long-kept secret from suffering the daylight. The Cuban Missile Crisis is almost always told in photos of cabinet rooms and television addresses. But these pages take us under the water, to a hull that was not built for tropical heat, and a commander whose blood remembered ice. By the time you reach the entry for October 27th, the handwriting is shaky. The numbers still matter. Internal temperature, battery percentage, hours since last snorkel, but they look like they were written in a moving truck with the lights turned off. The cards about signaling depth charges are clean and cheerful. Low-charge grenades indicate rise to surface request. The men on the boat do not read the cards. They feel the explosions and they interpret them as explosions, because that is what they are. In this archive bundle, the Soviet notes are not complete. They were never meant for outsiders, but the American papers are too calm. An after-action report describes the use of harassing charges to encourage a hostile submarine to surface for identification. The phrase is a linguistic tourniquet. It closes off blood flow to the moral extremities of the event. Meanwhile, in the Russian shorthand, there's a simple crucifying line. No order from command, conditions extreme. That word extreme is useful. It is precise in engineering and ambiguous in life. There is a protocol aboard this boat so strange it reads like fiction. To fire a nuclear torpedo, 3 men must agree. In most places, 2 signatures close a circuit, but here a triangle is required. It is, on paper, a sanity check. In practice, it is a moment when one voice can stand against physics, rage, heat, and the grinding legalism of war. 2 signatures are ready. The captain, certain a war has already started, signs in his head before his pen hits the paper. The political officer, who represents a state that values appearances even when the paint is peeling, is prepared as well. The third man, the senior officer on the detachment, has a memory built of bad metal and burning coolant. He has seen what a reactor can do when it gets the smallest thing wrong. He does not sign. The American files say the depth charges were small, and they were. The Soviet notes do not care. The hull doesn't either. A steel drum struck with a small hammer still rings. Pneumatic pumps are failing. Men are slumped over their stations, their bodies deciding that heat is a kind of drowning. In the tidy US doctrine sheet, there is a cartoon of a signal flag meaning, "You are being directed to surface." There is no card for "your crew is running out of oxygen," and the ship feels like a hand closing. The third man suggests a test, a ping, one loud, unambiguous sound into a world of muffled violence. It is a nearly mystical act for an engineer, seeking truth, not with hope but with information. The return is silence, the kind of useful silence that proves the world is not currently ending. The order to prepare the nuclear torpedo is set aside. The men rise when they can to breathe. At the surface, the American show of lights is military theater, a bright and bold punctuation to a day spent in grey grammar. This ship belongs to the Union. In some official retellings, the exchange is curt, but courteous, as if two diplomats met under a spotlight in the ocean and agreed to be reasonable. The documents here complicate that. The translated Russian notes are bitter, and the US paper is satisfied with itself. The space between those attitudes is dangerous. It is filled with all the things that never make it into the reports. The smell of diesel, the slick of sweat under a harness, the look a captain gives the sea when he thinks no one is watching. You can feel in the phrasing that both sides wanted credit, and neither wanted the full accounting of how close the planet came to failing its temperature test. The box's 1962 set ends with papers from 2002, conference notes, transcripts where former officials use the word astonished more than once. Historians are brave in their way. They look at things in cold light on behalf of people who cannot bear to. A line in one summary has the ache of a late apology. We did not know they carried such a weapon. The horror in that sentence is not the ignorance. It is how long the ignorance lasted. When you lay the 1986 and 1962 papers side by side, the horrifying secret that this box preserved is not an espionage revelation or a cinematic twist. It is quieter and more terrible. It is that our doctrines, our very best attempts at order, designed to control terror at sea, nearly recreated it. A signaling charge is a perfect idea until it hits a hull already resonating with fear. A hold position order is admirable on a blackboard until the vent fans die. An automatic shutdown is an elegant safeguard until one cut wire in a blast zone turns it into a myth. The memos are fluent in bureaucracy. They talk about compliance and intervals, permissible exposure and duty cycles. But the compromises in these stories are not paragraphs. They are people who decide to interpret those paragraphs in a way that saves a life at the cost of a career, or saves a city at the cost of their own heartbeat. The K-219 captain is supposed to wait. He evacuates. The young reactor technician is supposed to be a node in a system. He becomes its last lever. The senior officer on the diesel boat is supposed to keep the chain of command lubricated. He jams it on purpose. The papers record these acts in the way papers do. A change to a section heading, a footnote about exceptional circumstances, a phrase like contrary to directive but consistent with preservation of force. It's fashionable to say the ocean keeps secrets, but the ocean in these pages is more like a mirror. It returns to us the risks we thought we had distributed across procedures. Signaling charges assumed perfect comprehension. Reactor auto trips assumed indestructible wiring. Nuclear torpedoes assumed an enemy who would read hesitation as weakness rather than restraint as strength. The larger ships circling above, the smaller men gasping below, the memos drifting between, none of them wanted catastrophe. But they were all participating in a game whose rules were written by people standing on land beneath fluorescent lights, where the air stayed the same temperature all day. One appendix in the 1986 packet is the kind of thing engineers write when they are frightened after the fact. It creates a new mode for manual intervention, clearer torque requirements, a second man specified, the path to actuation clarified with hydraulic assist. You are meant to read it and feel safer, but the paragraph is a memorial in code. It is the shape of a young man's last effort, etched into a set of instructions. If you stare at the steps, you can almost hear the hatch that didn't open, a sentence that ends without a period, because there is no one left to write it. The 1962 documents close with a different kind of change. They propose alternate signaling in future, radio if possible, acoustic patterns that cannot be mistaken for attacks. They also suggest, delicately, that certain weapons should not be deployed on certain classes of boats in certain theaters. You can feel the bureaucracy tugging its collar. Somewhere a senior officer wrote a note that has the force of common sense and the gravity of hindsight. Avoid the assumption of shared interpretation under unconventional stress. It is so perfect as to be useless in the field, and yet it is the exact sentence that could have saved the day without asking a human being under crushing heat to argue with his captain. The horrifying secret is not a single wreck or a single decision, but a series of recognitions that we have lived for decades this close to the edge, that paper says one thing while steel says another, and that our survival has repeatedly depended on the courage to contradict a rule that was meant to save us. The documents are not evidence of conspiracy, they are evidence of fragility. Archives are colder than oceans. They preserve details that seas erode. Somewhere under the Atlantic, a hull is turning slow circles in black pressure. Somewhere on a shelf, a photocopy of a memo is still perfectly legible. If you want the comfort of symmetry, you will not find it here. The men whose acts prevented catastrophe did not receive clean justice. The captain who evacuated his crew carries in the file the outline of an accusation. The legal marks that once said sabotage are later crossed out, but the pencil scars stay. The young man who shut down a reactor is honored in an official sentence that reads like a spare part number. The senior officer who refused a launch dies years later quietly. The line about his recognition in the conference minutes is simple and generous, but it comes after the fact and after his body has paid a separate bill from an earlier disaster. There is also the matter of the sea's ledger. Warheads that were designed to terrify cities are resting in sediments. Reactors that once thrummed with intention are quiet under thousands of meters of water. The documents speak about environmental pathways with the same hush they use for classified gear. Unrecovered devices, unquantified release scenarios. It is not clear how long we plan to remember those. The most honest sentence in the environmental notes is a measurement, followed by a phrase, within baseline variance, at present. That at present is doing heartbreaking work. It knows that time can turn even the safest present into a story future people will read with a finger against their lips. If you are looking for villains, the pages will frustrate you. There are errors that feel like fate reaching a hand into a machine. There are procedures that turn courage into complaint and then back into commendation. There are adversaries treating each other with a weird, precise hospitality, offering apologies over loud-hailers while lurking in numbers designed to scare. And there are bureaucrats who behave like human beings, and human beings who behave like bureaucrats. In the end, the clearest antagonist here is the gap between intention and effect, between what the rules meant to produce and what they almost did. The last sheet in the box is an inventory card. It lists what the folder once contained and what it still does. A red stamp marks items removed, diagrams that were too explicit, names that could cause embarrassment, but the stamp cannot remove the shape of what happened. You can see it in the spacing where a missing page would have described the exact hand-wheel angle for a reactor rod, or in the polite line where an American officer wrote, regretfully unaware, and then perhaps stared for a long time at the date. What these submarine documents revealed was not a single horrifying secret, but an entire category of them, that some of our most dangerous moments were created by good procedures colliding with bad conditions, that human beings rescued us by stepping outside the text, that the ocean still holds what we dropped into it when we thought the world could burn at noon and reset by dusk. If there is a lesson here for anyone with a binder and a badge, it is simple and impossible. Write rules that expect to be read by someone who is too hot, too tired, too scared to be perfect, and leave room in them for a young person's courage to be not a violation but the plan. This channel is built on stories like this, not because we love fear, but because we are trying to trace the narrow paths where our species chose not to end itself. A submarine is a device for controlling pressure. So are institutions, so are rules. The men in these pages, exhausted, blistered, whispering to each other through steel, remind us that the pressure never goes away. It is only ever managed, sometimes with a signature withheld, sometimes with a hatch that will not open, sometimes with a sentence in a file that survives the wreck it describes. We close the folder. The box goes back to the shelf. The sea, indifferent, remains.